Hi, Alvin. Hello, hello. Good to see everyone. All right, we're not going to waste a minute. We are going to talk a little bit about Megillat Rut, and we're just delighted that you're joining us. This is the second in a three-part series that we're hosting to prepare for Shavuot. Last week was Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Schiffman, and if you weren't able to listen, we have that recorded for you. Next week, it'll be Rabbi Dr. David Bashevkin. So, three different teachers, three different approaches. I'm going to do a little bit on text and art for those of you who joined me before. I always have a little fun time with that. I do apologize for the weather because I always associate Megillat Rut with a sunny day out in the fields, and it is a cold day. It is raining. I hope someone out there is in some sunshine or had some sunshine today. But it's not the right weather for Rut, but we have a few weeks as we're counting up to Shavuot. So uh, we're going to look at an unusual medium for the depiction of a biblical scene, or biblical scenes, and that is the woodcut. Woodcuts are very, very old media. You can imagine that it's relatively simple to gouge out wood. It's an inexpensive form of art, and wood blocks were used initially to print onto textiles. So let's say you had, you know, your plain white tunic, and you wanted to put a little pizzazz in it. You might have gouged out some shapes. Some of us are familiar with the very primitive form of potato art. So similar sort of concept. You're gouging out something so that it fills in the space, and you get some very basic batik-y looking designs. And it's not something I'd never seen Megillat Rut or any biblical book, and very few religious scenes actually done in wood print. Every once in a while, you'll find them as a frontispiece in a book. It's something that looks rather primitive. But we're going to look at the depiction of Megillat Rut through the artwork of a woman named Margaret Adams Parker. She's been an artist for several decades. She teaches, she's from Virginia, and she did a book through the Jewish Publication Society of wood prints on Megillat Rut. So we're going to look at some text, and hold on, we're going to look at some text, and we're going to look at her woodcuts. And please feel free. I'll call on you as I want to do, and jump in. I can't always see you when I'm privileging the block ahead, so we can all see, right? So we're going to look at the beginning of Megillat Rut and talk about some of the tension that's embedded in the introduction. If I were to ask you, and please feel free to cascade in the chat, a word or two that you associate with the Book of Ruth, my guess is that it wouldn't be dark images. So why don't we just take 10 or 15 seconds, words that you associate with the Book of Ruth. Love to know what you think. You're also welcome to unmute, as long as you go back on mute, unmute and share a word or two of associations that you have with the Book of Ruth. Right, I think we have one in the chat, but I can't. Oh, leadership or lack thereof, honor of parents, commitment, chesed, sensitive to a woman's plight. Certainly, this is a book. This is a sisterhood book, right? This is a book that really engages the female relationships. We'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. So many people have these positive associations. Certainly by the end of the book, love and marriage and babies and harvest. The book starts off in a very, very dark place. And let's begin where the book begins. Very tightly, I would say from a literary perspective, very tight bookends of the context and the past that leads to the plot, and then concludes with the lineage of King David. So takes us far into the future. So there's some sense, especially when you have a short book, that something has taken place before this book and something will take place after this book, which is true of every story. But things that are momentous, and we're just getting this very little slice of time, and this very little slice of time, and it's a slice of time that in some way positions us to have a different orientation towards the events. And I want to actually share as we begin two orientations by which we might look at this book. The first is a state orientation. What is the state of the characters? What is their emotional landscape like? And the second orientation is an action orientation. What do characters in this book do as a result of the feelings they have? Now, in Tanakh, we often don't have any clue as to what someone feels. Probably if we were playing Family Feud, and you're welcome to drop your thoughts in the chat. If we were playing Family Feud and I said, what is the biblical story which reveals the least about someone's emotional disposition, you would say, anyone can chime in here, you can unmute. Biblical books where you say, I wish I knew what that character was thinking.
Cain and Abel, Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, right? The Akedah, right? That's probably the number one answer in Family Feud. Now this is totally subjective because I picked the answers. But Cain and Abel is a fantastic story. We do have a state and action orientation earlier than that. In the Garden of Eden, we have a sense that that these characters feel shame, and that the shame charges events. There's also disobedience, which propels events forward and locks them out of the garden. Certainly in the story of Cain and Abel, God asks Cain, Lama naflu fanecha, like why are you why is your face fallen? So we do have a sense that that there's an emotion there that has not been properly mined and then properly regulated. Certainly the midrashic treatment of the story of the Akedah, the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22, helps us, the midrashic treatment helps fill in the emotional gaps that are left by a text that is very sterile, that's taking us through the action, right? The action orientation as opposed to the state orientation, taking us through these actions, and we don't really have a sense of what anyone is feeling. So we're going to look at this book of Ruth, of course, in art and text, but also describe it in state versus action orientation. Vayhi b'mei shvot hashoftim. You can follow in English, follow in Hebrew. It was in the days when the judges judged. Vayhi ra'av ba'aretz ve'elech ish mibeit lechem Yudah lagor b'stei Moav hu v'ishto u'shnei vanav. All right, so great, tight storyline, opening, introduction. There's the period of the Shoftim. Immediately we can contextualize. Who wants to tell me something about the Book of Shoftim? Book of Judges? If you want a great stories to keep you up late at night, you can either read Stephen King or the Book of Judges. Anyone want to share thoughts on the Book of Judges? If you want to cascade it, that's also good.
En melech b'Yisrael ish ha'esha beinav yaseh.
Yeah. We have that line more than once in the Book of Judges. People did in their own eyes what was right and called anarchy because there were no judges, or there were no leaders, there were no true leaders, there's no king. And of course, it's a polemic to get a king. Then there are also stories that are really bewildering, like the story of Samson. The story of Samson, on the one hand, he did what he was supposed to in some way accomplish. He battled the Philistines single-handedly, ingratiated himself into their society through marriage and constant travel. And at the same time, he was so alienated from his fellow Israelites, that they actually tried to rope him and subdue his own leadership instincts. So he was an internal threat as well as an external threat. And I bring up the character of Shimshon because I think he's a paradox of a paradox that highlights a very conflicted society. We don't really know what to do with this character. And that is true in a lot of political renderings of unstable leadership. You just simply don't know what to do with the character. I'm making no comments on contemporary politics. I'm inviting us to be in the ancient world where you have a character like Shaul, who is the first king of Israel, who's tall and handsome and extremely problematic and disobedient. And so there's a sense when the reader is reading this, I don't know what to feel. On the one hand, I feel sad for this king because he was thrust into leadership. He didn't ask for leadership, but he's also not letting go of leadership, and he's trying to kill David, who's actually a competent warrior, and he's not a competent warrior. It's very confusing, and that confusion, the text sort of biblical texts often throw you straight into the center of a tornado of activities, of conflicting feelings, and ask you to sort it out. So that's it's almost like the code word Shvot HaShoftim is there's political anarchy, there's the beginning of idol worship, and they live in chapter 3. They're in of Sefer Shoftim. They live in a place called Bochim, which means cry. So imagine you're living in a place where you cry, you just paralyzed. You can't, you don't know how to move forward. You didn't have Joshua, right? And Moses, and then Joshua, and now you're sort of bereft of leaders. And for approximately 400 or so years, we live in this state of political insecurity. That is a long time to live that way. And on top of that, there's a famine in the land. And the famine in the land and the political insecurity seem to be the explanations for why a man from Beit Lechem Yehudah would go to live in the plains of Moab and bring his family. He doesn't go on his own, which is an option. How do we know it's an option? Because in times of starvation in the book of Genesis, where do you go? You go to Egypt. Egypt is enemy territory, but you need food, so you go there. And we have several biblical characters go there. Abraham, Yitzchak, then of course Yosef is taken there, and then Yosef's brothers come, and then Yosef's father Yaakov comes. So by the end of the book of Genesis, that is where we are. It's a temporary state. It's not a desirable location. It's a location that's very problematic and will be even more problematic in the future, as is true for the Moabites. And here you're looking at a reflection of locations that portend a terrible future. So let's talk a little bit. Let's just go into this in greater detail, because when you bring your whole family, it seems like you're staying. You're not just going and getting some bread and coming back. But let's talk about those locations. I love to point this out. If you studied this book with me before, I've said it before. You know that there's a problem when you go from a place called Beit Lechem, which means the house of bread, to Moab, which historically in the book of Bamidbar, we were going through. We were going through in the book of Numbers. We were leaving the desert. We were traversing the wilderness, or the desert rather, and the Moabites denied us bread when we asked. So, and that's one of the reasons that we don't marry marry into Ammonites and Moabites, because they denied us at a time of our need. They denied us basic nourishment. So here, something seems wrong. And I'm trying to think of a good analogy of going to the exact opposite place to get what you need. So if anyone has a fantastic location of moving from here to there, when there is the least likely place that you'd fulfill this need, and where you were seems to be the best place to fill it. So we're going from Beit Lechem, which no longer has lechem, no longer has bread, to the plains of Moab, and he takes his family. Shema ish Elimelech, Shem ishto Naami, great names. If you're looking for names for a guy and a gal who might be born, a baby girl, baby boy born near Shavuot, Elimelech signals royalty, right? My God is king, and Naomi, pleasant, V'Shem Shnei Vanav Machlon V'Chilion. These are terrible names, death and destruction. Not exactly, if you had twins, not exactly a fantastic pairing. Machlon V'Chilion, Ephratim Beit Lechem Yudah. So we're again ensconcing this family. They're Ephratites. Ephrat today is near Beit Lechem, where it is in the Gush Etzion block. These are people. It's not only that they lived in this place; they were of this place. People thought of them as people from Beit Lechem. In the tribe of Judah, in the tribal lands of Judah, Vayavo ste Moav v'yiyu sham, and they ventured to the fields of Moab, and they were there. So that's an interesting transitive verb. They were there. And if we're pacing it and watching, Vayelech, they go, and then it says they were there, they Vayavo, and they came there, V'yiyu. And there's a change, a subtle, very nuanced change that's taking place. They're going lagur first, the lielech, they're going, then lagur, they're the imperative to dwell, then they are there, and then they are there. They're really there. And so we have a sense that this family is journeying out, and everything is going to change for them rapidly. Now, I put these pictures together just for the sake of contrast. You can see how effective black and white actually is. Many of us are used to these very beautiful paintings, sort of in the Dutch master style of a scene, is wheat fields, and people are harvesting. It's beautiful and pastoral, and there's often Boaz at the center, and Ruth is prostrating herself in front of him, grateful that he has allowed her to plow in his fields. This is a very different style of art. So let's look at the first one. Anyone want to share in the chat or unmute? What are you seeing in the image to the left? Don't be shy. I know you. Let's see, we have some a united family. Looks like a barren land. Hello, Zaram family. Hello. Nice to see you. Looks like a barren land. So there is something, there's a sense of barrenness. It is hard to, in this medium, it would be hard to do, let's say, shrubbery. Leaving light to dark, thank you. You can see there's this bright white in the background, but if you look at their shadows, which the artist has done very cleverly, it's almost like four lines that are almost drawing you back, almost saying, no, don't go there. Because the path, as you see, it's a winding path, and it's not clear what exactly is happening. Is this in front of them? They're in the middle of the journey, and they're looking at all the mountain range ahead to get to the plains of Moab? Are they actually almost at the plains of Moab because they're on flat land right now, and they turn around to say goodbye to Beit Lechem? For those of you who have been in the area of Beit Lechem, in the Gush Etzion block, you know that they do terraced farming because it's extremely hilly. It's in Hare Yehuda. It's in the hills of Judah. And in a time of famine, it wouldn't seem to be a fantastic place to be, because it's hilly and because it would need to be highly cultivated and terraced to produce a harvest. So there's a foreboding sense that they're going into darkness, and maybe the mountains here in some way signify the very difficult climb ahead, the very difficult, if you were standing in front of a mountain, and I think about this all the time, pre-Shavuot, when you read Exodus 19, Sefer Shemot Yud Tet, and there's an image of the Israelites who will spend 3 months. They travel to a mountain and you spend 3 months in front of that mountain. Now, I'm not a camper. I cannot tell you what it's like to camp in front of a mountain, but I imagine if every day I had a mountain ahead of me, it would feel exhausting. It would feel like a challenge was always ahead that required an enormous amount of energy and one that I might not be successful at. And if you look actually, again, other things that the artist has done quite subtly, she paints Naomi or carves out Naomi as in white. Naomi is the only figure who will stay alive. So she's in white. And maybe we even have her in white because did she resist going? Did her husband try to convince her to leave? And she said, no, let's not take the boys there. You can see her left arm is around her youngest son. We're not, we assume it's Chilion because he's second. Generally, biblical oldists go first. His head seems to be bowed. Is he sad to leave? They're so alone. Do you notice there's no one there? It's just this nuclear family. Now, why would the artist want to depict them as alone? Thoughts on that? Not too talkative tonight. Interested in your ideas. They're standing on straight land. Life is smooth and straight, facing mountains. Right, what their life becomes. Beautiful. Thank you. There's true alienation here. There's a sense of the liminality of where they are. They are in between lives. When you pack up your entire life and you go, you just try to escape where you are for some better pastures, you're in your family unit. You don't have others who understand. I mean, they're going to a foreign country. They don't know the language. They don't know the customs. They don't share the same faith. They don't even share the countries don't look alike, given the terrain. And so everything will be an uphill battle for them. All right, I see we have some activity in the chat. They'd be strangers in the land, leaving alone. No other families are going with them, right? Most people stayed in Beit Lechem. They're the only ones to leave. They abandoned their people, which is certainly one midrashic reading of why this happened. They're just their nuclear, family, and they disregarded the larger family, right? The larger human family, the family of Ephrathites that they came from. And certainly deserting in a time of famine is something we understand people who do that, but we're also leaving them in a time of need, leaving behind people who feel vulnerable. And maybe in that in-between space, there's a lot of hesitation. There's a lot, like I love that the artist has decided to paint or I would say it's not painting, but gouging out so that the black frames a white space of uncertainty. It's almost you can paint your future here, right? You could be anything or nothing. And also that space where so many thoughts are generated along the way. What are we doing? Is this the right idea? Defending your decision, justifying your decision. I'm not going to ask you because it seems like no one wants to unmute, but if you want to, I'd be delighted. And you're certainly welcome to drop in the chat thoughts that any of you have had when you've gone from one country to the next for an extended period of time, or to move, or even across the same country. I have made a number of continental moves. And I mean, it's true that I married an Englishman, and as Churchill said, we are divided by a common language. They say, oh, well, it's an English-speaking country, but it's, has different culture, different ways of doing things, and the sense of how long it takes until you feel a sense of belonging. And the artist, I think, has done that magnificently. All right, hold on. Only Ruth is carved white. That's Naomi, actually. They were prominent people and they left the commoners behind, right? So the midrashic reading is that they were Parnasei Ha'ir. They were the generous people, the philanthropists of the town. They knew in a time of famine, people would come knocking on their doors, and they weren't interested in. And Maimonides actually, it takes this approach in his legal book. He actually writes about the idea of them absconding from their responsibility at this particular time. So the image on the right, we're going to read a little bit and then talk about the image of the right, which is very, you think, well, okay, I understand you're going to do mountains, but how are you going to do a face? And what a face, how are you going to do a hand? Look at that hand. It's an unbelievable hand. It's old and anguish. And if you just looked at that hand, you would get a sense of how you might read this text. So this is Ruth, these are the verses that come immediately after. וימת אלימלך איש נעמי, ותישאר היא ושני בניה. So Elimelech died. No reason for his death, but he dies. And also, we have no sense of time. We don't know if this happened immediately or this happened sometime later. And Naomi was left. Tishaer is a very strong and interesting verb, to remain. I guess we might certainly in this century post-Holocaust almost see it as she survived, she and her two sons. And it says her two sons, did she have some kind of hold on them that her husband didn't, or did she have to become now both parents to her sons? So this sense of I remain, I survive, and Vitishaer has an additional meaning because she remained in this place, right? She remains in Moab. She could have said, "Oh gosh, Elimelech wanted to go. We've had no luck here. Everything, fate has turned against us. We made a bad decision. It's time to go home." V'yisu lahem nashim Moaviyot. So now we know some time really seems to have passed. They were there for a while. Midrashic treatment leaves it about 10 years. They were there and they had Moabite wives. The name of the first was Orpah. The name of the second, Hashenit, is Rut. V'yeshvu sham ke'eser shanim. The ke'eser shanim is, they were there about 10 years. The midrashic treatment of this is that this couple was infertile, hearkening to the Abraham story. And there are many, many resonances between the Abraham story and the Ruth story. And I invite you to think about some of them, things that sound somewhat familiar to you, sort of the female version. Some have called Ruth the female version of the Abraham story in some way. This journey of faith that is also a journey to a different place, that is also a transformative journey. And these women are infertile. These Moabite women are infertile. That's why there are no children. And so the comparison to Sarah and Abraham being together for 10 years, and which is the designation of a time where you're not likely perhaps to have future children in the biblical. So I'm not talking about today. So these two men. Now imagine you're Naomi. You remain in this land, maybe with your hesitations, maybe we should go back, but you don't go back. And then your two sons marry out. They marry Moabite women. I mean, of course, they're going to get married at some point, and there aren't Israelite women there. It's an enemy territory. That's not where they're going to be. And they lived there for about 10 years. And so there's a sense, right, as we were looking at all those different verbs of transition and travel, right? They go, they dwell, they're there. V'yeshvu sham ke'eser shanim, right? They're really dwelling there. They're really living there. How does it translate it here? Right, they live there. Then those two, v'yamutu gam shnehem, right? So the gam indicates certainly to commentators that the same thing that killed Elimelech killed these two, right? Or it could be that death visited again. And these two, Machlon v'Chilion, these two terrible names, probably the editor's note as the way we might want to think about these two. And V'tishaer, she remains, Haisha, the woman remains, Mishtei Eldeha Umisha. And this actually, it's it's the universal story of grief. This woman remains, it's not her name, we don't use her name. So the woman remains without her two children and without a husband. They are not called Baneha as they were called before Baneha, just in that earlier verse in this same section. They're not called her sons, they're called her children. A Yeled in biblical Hebrew is a child before the age of 12. So it's a young child. And yet and these are men, these are married men, but there's something about a woman who loses a child and that's this I don't know how to say it in English well, but that she becomes somehow bereft of her motherhood and of her husband. So what's happened now is a narrowing of Naomi's life. She had a country, she had a city, she had a husband, she had children, and as we'll see, she did have a community of females. She had a sisterhood. And all of that becomes this inverted funnel in her new life. She is, at this point, one cannot imagine her more alone. And I do want to make one point about her sons marrying out. We do have a parallel text of a young man who chooses to marry out that takes place in, we'll say, approximately the same time.
I'm listening to this here.
Excuse me?
Someone had unmuted accidentally. I just
Oh.
removed
I'm sorry.
them.
Okay, no worries. So let's see. Yeah, I appreciate the comments in the chat. Yeah, so wait, where was I?
The story about the person
Okay.
marrying out.
What did you say, Lisa?
No, was that the
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
It's the person, the story of the son who's marrying out. Was
Yes,
that-
the son of marrying out. So anyone, Jeopardy for 400? Anyone know? Shimshon, right? And in the book of Shoftim, Shimshon wants to take a Philistine wife, and this was not common behavior. He goes back to his parents. Now, his parents have no idea, number one, of his strength, and number two, that he wanted to integrate into the Philistines so that he could destroy them. They think, oh, it's like, and they say what Jewish parents have been saying for millennia, which is you couldn't find a kindred, a wife from your brothers, from among your family. As why do you need to marry? And so they sort of haltingly give permission, and at the same time, there's at least the kavod, at least the respect that he pays his parents to ask permission. No one asks Naomi. No one asks Naomi anything. You almost have a sense that she's an absolutely passive character in her own life. In fact, I've often argued that this should be called the Book of Naomi, because in order for this book to do its work, you're going to have to take that funnel of alienation and you're going to have to rebuild it so that she gains back what she lost. Not that you could gain everything back that she lost, but that her life takes on a new fullness and perhaps an amplified fullness as a result of some of the decisions she makes later. But at this point, I think that I have never seen a more poignant depiction of Naomi in the years that I've been looking at art on this book. And if any of you have a great depiction of Naomi in this state, and you understand why people don't do it, because their associations, these pastoral associations they make with the book, in many ways don't invite the gloom and the darkness that really is here. And so I'm wondering, I did actually many years ago, I did have a correspondence with the artist, Margaret Adams Parker. I did really want to know what motivated her. I can't remember. I can't remember the correspondence. I couldn't find it. I think that the choice. I wonder if she was studying this book and said, you know, how would I communicate the darkness? And conversely, the light, how would I best do that? What would I do it in black and white? Color influences the way that we think about something. So anyone want to share with me? I know this is one comment here. They married only after Elimelech has passed. Thank you. True. Anyone want to share what you're noticing in the woodcut of Naomi and how the artist has done it? Well, notice it's a frame within a frame. So framing is a common woodcut technique. We're trying to communicate some degree of depth. So you get a little bit of sense that she's popping out of the frame. Maybe behind her is some kind of window on her past life. Like the light is behind her, as opposed to the other depiction where the light is ahead of her. Notice that she had this like baggage on her head in the image to the left, right? She had this something on her head. And now there's a sense, that there's nothing there, right? It's nothing on her head. Her face is so wrinkled. It doesn't look like there's only been 10 years between the image of the left and the image of the right. It looks like it's been 100 years. You notice that it looks like she's holding herself up because who can hold her up? She has no one else to support her. It's just this figure of darkness. Even her sense of childlessness, which we'll encounter in a speech she gives soon, she covers her chest, which is the place of her nourishment of her children once upon a time. There's a sense that all of that life has collapsed. And the way that the artist has done the head scarf and her face, just everything has become this wrinkle in time and wrinkle in tragedy, right? I love that her sufferings are carved on. She looks very old. Her face is deeply lined. Thank you, Ariel. Nice to have you. The lines on her face look like they could have been made by so many tears, like grooves in a rock. Wow, that's gorgeous. I think we feel something when we see this image, and then things are gonna get things are gonna be different. First of all, in the very next verse, Naomi v'takamhi, right? She gets up and she makes a decision that she's going to go back. ותצא מן המקום אשר הייתה שמה ושני חלותיה עמה ותלכנה בדרך לשוב אל ארץ יהודה. So she picks up her family. I didn't give you the whole 6. I think a little bit of verse 6 got cut out. That she got up and she went from this place, and her 2 daughters-in-law joined her, and they v'telechna b'derech l'shuv el eretz Yehuda. Now, of course, she might carry with her all of, in Hebrew say hitlaptut, all of the hesitations and the difficulties. Like, why didn't I go back earlier? My life could have been different. My sons could have been raised differently. Maybe they would have married among our own people. I would have had grandchildren by now. I could have rebuilt my life by now. But she does make a decision, and I think it's a very empowering decision, that even a woman in the ancient world who would normally not travel alone was prepared to go back. And you can see, imagine them walking. B'tomer Naomi l'shtei chalotah, lech nashovna isha levet ima. She says, go back, each of you, to the home of your mothers. She doesn't say fathers. It's interesting to read commentators on this, that she did not say fathers because the mothers would be more compassionate. Remember, they also married out, right? They also left. They left their homes, and maybe she's saying there's something unnatural about you coming with me. I'm not your mother. I'm your mother-in-law, right? Yaseh Hashem imachem chesed kasher asitem imameitim v'imadi. We have no idea that they have done any kindness towards her and towards the dead. She thanks them for it. So there's some kindness, some currency of kindness that has been shared among these women that has not been evident to the reader. That actually is not insignificant because later Boaz will talk about the chesed that he knows of Ruth that was not articulated. So not Naomi in some way shared with Boaz this same sense of chesed. Yitain Hashem lechem matzena menucha isha beit isha. So now they've moved from their mother's home to their husband's home, right? So you should find peace, each woman in the house of your husband. Basically, what she's saying to them is get remarried, enjoy life, rebuild. And this will also become a referendum on her own life because I don't have a chance. And we'll get to that momentarily. V'tishak lahem v'tisena kolam v'tivachena, right? And it was, you imagine this scene. They're hugging and crying, and there's real grieving that's taking place now. But and then they say in one voice, "We're going to go back with you." And Naomi says again, Shovna benotai lama telech Naomi haodli banim b'me'ai v'ayu lachem la'anashim. He's like, don't take a chance on me. I got nothing for you. It's like, it's not like, I'm gonna give birth to more children. Shovna benotai, right? It's like, go back, right? Again, how many times can you tell people, I just don't want you with me? Kiza kanti me'od la'ish. I was like, I'm too old. I don't have a life anymore. Even if I had hope, which she doesn't have any, gam hayiti alayla lish. It was even if I had a man tonight, v'gam yaladati banim, right? And even if I had, boys, would you're going to wait for them until they grow up? I mean, it's almost a crass image, right? Imagine if your mother-in-law said, like, even if I slept with someone tonight, would I have? It's like, it feels so it feels so atonal for the moment to speak like this. And obviously in some way this is a soliloquy on her own pain, as opposed to really giving them, like, she was ready to break off with them. And as they grieve more with her, and they obviously have been through something together and they're not ready to separate, but she says, the only reason you would come with me is because I have something for you. And I don't have anything for you. Now, Ruth thinks, no, you have everything for me. And it's everything that you don't realize I want. And that's something I think we miss when we're studying the Book of Ruth, is the way in which Naomi believes that they have a life ahead and she does not, and that the life ahead is about marriage. Marriage, in some ways in this book, is almost incidental. They get married, Boaz and Ruth get married and get pregnant in one verse and have a child. Doesn't happen that way in real life. So what I mean incidental is there's the real transformation is the transformation, the way in which chesed transforms people, kindness changes lives here, and in the way that a faith commitment becomes much more important to Ruth. Just as Naomi feels like my life is over, so don't come with me. And I've heard many men and women who are aging speak this way. I remember, a certain age when my Bubi Aleha Shalom, of blessed memory, would say something like, she wanted to buy a dress, and then she go, what does an old lady need a new dress? Who cares what I look like, right? So I imagine that some of you have heard similar things to this. Like, what do I need? What do I need this for? I'm not important anymore. I'm not doing anything anymore. I'm invisible, right? You will often hear people feel this about themselves. I've become invisible in a youth-oriented society. I have nothing to give you, because she sees this as transactional. What she doesn't see, at least she fails to see at this point, is that for Ruth, this has nothing to do with a future as a wife and mother, much as she will become those things. It has to do with adjoining yourself to a remarkable story that you want to make your own. And I have to share with you, having worked with many converts over the course of my teaching career, the journey is unbelievable. It's mystical and ethereal and difficult, right? Talk about having a mountain in front of you. That's what conversion is. That is what conversion is for many people. And sometimes we push people away because we don't understand their deep yearning and desire for this kind of belonging, to be part of the Jewish family, to be part of the Jewish fate and destiny, to use Rav Soloveitchik's language. So let's look at the, at the end, right, where she says, "V'tizena kolam v'tivachena od," right? They're still crying and sobbing, and Orpah kisses her mother, l'chamuta v'Ruth davkaba, and Ruth clings to her. Now the clinging, right? We say Ruth hugs her, but it's really more than hug. Davkaba, she clings to this future of her mother, and although Orpah is criticized, Eref means neck, and so the Midrash says Orpah was named because she turned her neck from her mother-in-law. I don't think I don't think this was put on. I think Naomi had no expectations of them coming back. I don't think that she wanted them back. I think they would only cause her pain. If they came back with her, she would be obligated. She would have to explain their presence in her life. And Ruth clings to her. Aviva Zornberg Gottlieb Zornberg has a beautiful essay on Ruth's clinginess as something that maybe someone wouldn't really want in their lives. Someone who sort of clings to you and needs you so much at a time where you don't have anything to give. And Naomi had nothing left to give, as evidenced by the image that we saw earlier. So I wanted to look at this scene, the scene on the left. The scene on the left, I think, is extremely powerful. It's a column of pain, and the figures are, in essence, undifferentiated. You're not really sure which one is Naomi, which one is Ruth, and which one is Orpah. We can take a guess. And you're welcome to guess. You're welcome to drop it in the chat. Generally speaking, it seems that Naomi is the standing figure, and because her hands seem to be the same, like that same wizened old hand. But Naomi covers her face, and it could be that, right, Ruth is the one that is holding on to her, and Orpah, because we see her feet, is the one who is going to move away. She's crying, and she's going to step away. Alternatively, Ruth may be the one standing, holding on to Naomi, who is an older woman who is sitting down. Right? So there's a lot of ways to see this. You could even say that Naomi is the woman in the foreground because she is going to walk home, and the sisters-in-law are joined because they're sisters-in-law who've lost husbands, and so and they're both Moabites. So there's a lot of ways, and I think the artist played with this ambiguity in a very effective way, and in some way communicated that despite all the differences in age and status and faith and country, that when we lose someone, there is a bond that is almost unshakable and unbreakable. There's something that these women, these human beings, have been through that no one else will understand. And sometimes you'll speak to someone who has had a particular type of loss and feels that only those who have suffered that very same loss would possibly ever understand. And even then, you can never, never understand. And the Talmud discusses, and the 8th chapter of Bava Kama discusses ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, and how problematic it is to pay an eye for an eye. And one of the sages says, if you lose an eye, you can never understand like the size of someone else's eye. As so you had a blue eye and you took out my eye, but I have a brown eye, and I have a big eye and you have a small eye. But it's also, of course, a much larger thing. What I see is not what you see, is you can never really have commensurate suffering. But this moment in time is very, very tender. And the artist wants to show you that these women were aligned in some way, that the crying was sincere, that the grief was deep. But when the Shiva is over, so to speak, they're going to go their separate ways. And that was always Naomi's understanding. Now, of course, Then these women come, Naomi and Ruth, come to Beit Lechem. So we're just going to look at this last piece right here on this page. V'telech nashtehem ad bona Beit Lechem. They come to the entrance of Beit Lechem. So you know that these were probably walled cities or gated in some way. And you come to there's got to be a lot of anxiety in that coming back, not knowing what someone's feeling, not knowing what someone's thinking. Vahi kibona Beit Lechem. V'tehom kol ha'er lehen, v'tomarna hazot nomi. And this is the female plural. And they say, that famous question, is this Naomi? I mean, could this be Naomi? Could this be the woman who left us in our time of need and is coming back in her time of need? So you can read all kinds of snarkiness into this, all kinds of alienation into this. You see the artist has rendered some men on the sides, but the women, you can almost, the artist has done so cleverly, you could sort of see in the, you imagine the faces on the other side of those tunics, looking with wide eyes at these two grieving women who are physically unrecognizable, right? And Naomi says, like they're speaking to her in this very marginalized, in a way that marginalizes her. And she says to them, don't call me that. It was, I don't need you to punish me because God's punished me enough. Anim le'a lachti v'rekama shiveni. Right? It's like Hashem, Hashiveni Hashem, Lama tikra'ena li Naomi, v'Hashem anavi v'shadai herali. And it was, God, don't call me Naomi because God has consistently punished me. Look at all the things that I've lost. I can't own my name anymore. And Naomi, which is interesting to me because when people convert, we give them a change of name. And Ruth stays the same name, but Naomi is the one who has this really existential shift so that she can't even own her own identity anymore. And Ruth comes back, Hamoaviyah, even though she's made this journey, Hamoaviyah, Chaltaima, Hashava Miste Moav, right? So they've come back, but when they say Hazot Nomi, they don't even render, they don't even notice or recognize Ruth's existence. They don't say Hazot Nomi and who's with you. The me, he, like who is she? She is just ignored. And at the same time, the text gives us that little drop of hope. B'tchila katsir sa'orim. There's the wheat harvest is approaching, and something good is on the horizon. So we've seen a lot of images of grief. I just want to go back to that first set, right? Them setting out, family of 4, a remaining woman of 1, a column of grieving women who are soon to separate, and then these 2 women who come back to this community of men and women. And again, look at the way the artist has framed them, a frame within a frame. They're at that gate, and so everybody is just looking at them as if they're a picture, right? Like literally a framed picture. Who are these people? What do they want from us? What are they back here to do? Let's look at the final image. The final image takes us all the way, because I told you we're gonna try to invert the funnel that goes in the inverted funnel, and the narrowing becomes fuller. And so in order to gain acceptance, we know that ultimately Naomi is going to need to do 2 things. One is that or 3 things rather, that the property that was associated with her late husband would return to her through the vehicle of a levirate marriage. We're not going to talk about the technicalities of a levirate marriage, but the return of property, the return of maternity, the return of community, and the return of God, right? And I'm going to save the best for last, or the most significant. And it was, Naomi has lost everything. And the thing that she tells that tells the women when she returns to Beit Lechem is, I've lost God along the way. right? That's the journey the journey home has been bereft of God. God has abandoned me. That is her feeling. So it's natural. We say, like, what is a strange scene in 4 where the women actually gather to Naomi, and the women are going to sort of name the baby. It's the oddest thing. So let's go there, and we'll go to the visual image that the artist creates for us. But Tomer Nashim El Naomi Baruch Hashem Asher Lo Hishbit Lach Goel Hayom V'Yikra Shmo BeYisrael. And the women say to Naomi, Baruch Hashem, blessed be the God who did not spare a redeemer from you this day. And Goel, the term Geulah is very important in the Book of Ruth, the sense of who is the redeemer. So many people redeem her life. V'Yikra Shmo BeYisrael, they call his name in Israel. Vayalech lemeshiv nefesh ulchalkel et sabatech. You have this woman who is really nourishing. It's like a spirit nourisher, right? She's bringing your life back and taking care of you in your old age. And your daughter-in-law who loves you, right? A daughter-in-law who loves you, is better to you than 7 sons. The woman they didn't notice at all, Hazot Naomi, no mention of Ruth. Is this Naomi? Now they've recognized her goodness, they've recognized her love, and they've recognized the child that she has born. V'tikach Naomi et hayeled, and Naomi takes the baby to her chest. Remember that chest that looked so flattened before, so desperate before? Look at the way that Naomi looks at this baby, and look at the proud mother who, and also I love the windows out into the world, the curtains that give these women privacy in this new community of love that they've created. Aveti Lolo Menet, she will be a nursemaid to this child. And these women together give this child a name, and they call the child Oved. Now, Oved is not a name that took on, we name people, I mean, wouldn't you name a baby Oved? Because the union of Boaz and Ruth, it can't get better than that in the Hebrew Bible. And at the same time, the word Oved reminds us of the sense of avdut, of the same root as servitude. But there's a sense that this child is named service, because the child actually is, the child represents the service of Ruth to Naomi, the service of Boaz to Naomi, the service of Ruth to Boaz and Boaz to Ruth. There's the chance that this child will ultimately be the ancestor of a servant of Israel, King David. And here you have all of these women together, celebrating the birth of this child as the book ends. And with that, it is 9 o'clock. I'm going to stop the share. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for a little conversation on art and text. And I hope that those woodcuts stay with you as images when you're studying this book on Shavuot. Chag Sameach to you all.
Notice the change in Naomi's hands.
Yes.
She's no longer the skeletal sand. She's
No,
now
yes,
the
yes.
power.
Right, the return of life and love. And don't forget to count Sphira tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for joining me. It's been a delight.